Good morning. It's another early morning, Saturday morning, and it's Diamond Hog Day. We know that's tonight. I'm trying to get on here early and get my business out of the way. We got this is going to be a loaded intel segment. We typically have plenty of segments of the week where we bring some intel. This is more, in my opinion, relative to some of the recent stuff that's been going on. Thank you for joining me this early. For those who are brave enough to do this on a Saturday this early, this will certainly be archived and available on the HogvilleNET um, uh, YouTube channel. Obviously, if you're hearing me say that, you've already found it if you didn't watch it live. Uh, so anyway, but welcome, Hardy, folks, Razorback fans. Man, the Diamond Hogs and LSU tonight. You got probably the two best teams in the field meeting in the first game, and they're the late game, the last game out of 4 and 8 teams, and I guess it's the Elite Eight of the College World Series, and then hopefully Arkansas gets back to the best of 3 title series where with their third chance to get to a final 2, and then for the first time maybe win it all. But it starts tonight, and so. But there's still basketball to talk about and some relevant basketball to talk about because of some recent developments. And I've got multiple pieces of intel, and I'll frame it this way. I'm going to first give it to you in like just a nutshell version. The top 3 points here, and in the subtext, we'll dive deeper into. There'll be more parts of the intel that really help fill out this picture and explain everything. And a good portion of this, most of it is coming from a couple of conversations I had with the Arkansas Razorbacks men's basketball staff yesterday evening after the news broke of Arkansas's second commitment in about a 24-hour frame, moving Thursday through Friday, picking up a couple of international players. One, a true overseas guy coming over to play at Arkansas. The other one, an Angolan native who's been stateside and playing at a prep school or was listed with West Oaks out of Florida, and a couple of big men on the front line. So you had 2 out of the portal added to your front line, and you've got two frontliners in these last 2 additions with all the international flavor. So the intel is this: 3 things are kind of be the headliners here. The trio of names that the Arkansas coaching staff was focused on in the last couple of weeks were in, I guess you could say, /R, because I think we'll talk about it, what's in play maybe still. Egor Ryzhov, Elmir Javic, and Paulo Semedo. The last 2 names are the 2 players that just committed to Arkansas within a 24-hour spanning, Thursday to Friday. Ryzhov is the one who we were thinking would be the announcement, working on that for multiple days. A lot of smoke that Arkansas was closing in on obtaining Ryzhov. And when I gave that name to the staff, I didn't get a denial or a confirmation. And then when I got Javic's name the day before he committed that he would be committing, and asked about that, same thing, no acknowledgement, no denial. Now, after this conversation last night, staff confirmed that Ryzhov was in the mix of these 3 players, not that they're, trying to finish up with. Now, we only got 2 announcements. And if it makes sense, because our as we move through the reporting on Ryzhov, before we even got to these 2 names, I think it was my Wednesday morning segment, I said at the end of it, in the last 2 minutes, I brought up the fact that I'm hearing more and more there's complications that could really drag this out, and this could be a late addition in terms of when they would arrive. But if you think about it, it also makes sense that if it's ever going to happen, you're probably not going to announce a commitment anytime soon. Right? Because if it doesn't work out, you've kind of polluted the water a little bit. You've set a bar for expectations. You've got a public commitment, and now that makes it even harder maybe to continue to recruit other players that could fill that spot if you don't think it's going to work out. So it's better to kind of distance yourself from a public announcement, even if you've got an agreement in principle, and now you're just trying to work out the contingency of getting your visa cleared, something like that. all that makes sense. And so, but the intel on the first part of this is that those trio of names are the names. So Ryzhov is all the source information was good, including, and now the staff member did not confirm the issues, but those are already known. I don't need them to confirm that. We already know what that is. Just that was one of the three that was the focal point. And so you got two of those, and those were the ones when the staff acknowledged a few days ago when I asked, is there, I'm hearing a commitment, it's coming soon. And they said, yeah, keep that, yeah. And then I said, I'm hearing a lot of international names. Could be. Okay, so these two commitments, more than the one we were expecting, and neither were the one we were expecting, but it's the picture starting to come together. And now the staff is confirming it. I mean, it's obvious when you got commitments from two of them, right? We know that they were in the mix because they've been added and committed, and that's gone public. But to also confirm now that Ryzhov was in that mix, that's important. And I'm going to tell you why, because the second part of this intel, the door's at least cracked, and maybe more than that, to still add Egor Ryzhov. So if you're hearing any talk about the staff is done with this roster, it's a bit premature. And so when I go back and talk about all this, I'll give more background and more explanation of why I'm at that point where that's what, why I believe that and why I think that will be true. Could be true. All right. And then the third part of this, a future Naismith Hall of Fame college coach absolutely raved about future Hog, recent commitment, 5-star JJ Andrews, class of 2026. This future Hall of Fame, Naismith Hall of Fame college coach, head coach, raved about JJ during the MBPA Top 100 camp. And he wasn't the only one among other coaching staffs, but this is one that kind of stands out, and I'll fill in the blanks as we get to that part of it. That'll be the last thing we talk about. It's a good piece of intel, I think, because we've been talking all along about this guy being underrated by the recruiting services, maybe being slept on by others. And to hear some of the feedback I've gotten from this 2-day, the camp was multiple days this week, but really only 2 days for live eval for Division I head coaches to go out there. And so to hear some of the stuff that these other staffs are saying, they were blown away. I mentioned the last couple of segments I was on prior to the last one I did yesterday, which was the reaction segment to the latest edition of Paulo Semedo. I've been talking about the performances at the camp, the fact that Arkansas's entire staff was there, talking about some specifics in terms of what JJ Andrews was doing in these 5-on-5 games and how he's arguably the top performer there. Well, the feedback I'm getting and what other folks have seen, including not just Arkansas coaching staff, but other coaches, is that's kind of the sentiment. This dude stood out among a camp loaded with stars. So we're going to get to all that almost 8 minutes in. My name's Kevin McPherson. I'll be your host today again, and it's HogvilleNET YouTube Live. So let's jump right into some of this stuff and break it down a little bit. We know that the 6'11", 265-pound Elmir Javich committed to Arkansas on Thursday publicly. We learned of it on Wednesday, came on early Thursday morning, said, hey, this could drop today. It didn't drop last night. I'm told it then would likely drop today. I don't see this as someone that would impede going after Ryzhov, because I see this as a back end kind of piece in that similar vein of Kareem Artal, maybe even Isaiah Seeley, and you have a known top 8 rotation, and that a guy like Ryzhov would be kind of that ninth guy that I can envision even expressing out loud some minutes for him. And I said it, kind of a ceiling of 12 to 15 minutes, maybe something as 10 or less even, but I could see a projection for him to have a minutes role as your backup 4 and maybe even help at 5 some, because of his experience, his age, and some of his attributes. But I haven't been able to say that for anybody else. Seeley's been on board since November. Artal's been on board for months. And we've never, when we talked about minutes, disbursements, roles, what the rotation looks like, this. I've said it, talked a lot about it. I've never had a definable vision for or projection for how they fit into a 2 deep. I just didn't see it that way yet. Although I did see them as more playable help beyond the top 8 if you get into emergency situations like you did last year and have attrition or illness and in-game foul trouble and a combination of some of those things, right? And so I said Jovic, in my mind, is in that outside the rotation group, at best your third center. And then I talk more about really fourth, because Brazil is your back as a guy that can play the 5, is kind of your third 5. And you're going to see him slide over and play those minutes before you're going to see Jovic. So he's outside looking in. And we just don't know what the spots are going to be for a guy like that to get on the court. I'm not saying he'll never get on the court. I'm saying I don't envision him as in your playable, consistent, regular, planned rotation. But I did see Ryzhov that way, and it's why I said, wow, I've just got a 5:40 in the morning notification from Jonathan Givony of ESPN Draft Express. Okay, he's up early too, so I'm not the only cuckoo. All right, so where was I? Okay, so I didn't see an impediment to continue to add a Ryzhov. And so later Thursday, we get this announcement. Okay, I didn't come on and do a live reaction for Jovic on Thursday. I waited until my early Friday morning segment about 24 hours ago, and I gave a reaction to that. I kind of repeated some of the same stuff. I said, I still have a couple of sources that still think Arkansas is the ultimate destination for Ryzhov, and that was post this learning of this player committing. So again, it kind of lined up with my thought process. Ryzhov's a guy can see fitting in there. This is another back end piece. You can go to 15. Why not? And develop the guy. And who knows what you have later. And if it was such an emergency that you're down to him, unlike last year where you didn't have any frontline options outside of your top 9, you didn't have guys you planned on playing. But even if you had to, the only one was Lawson Blake, and he was lost due to injury. He was still on the roster. He made it a 15-man roster. They didn't run him off to add another body for practice and all that. They kept him, and they were full at 15, including Lawson Blake. But the point is, Jovic is somewhere in that, I'm not saying completely in no man's land, but somewhere kind of at the back end, and it still leaves room for a true rotation piece, not a splash guy, but that's not what we've ever said Ryzhov is. All right, so you get the commitment announcement on Jovic. Then we get the surprise yesterday. It was a surprise for me, as was Jovic. It's not my original source 2 weeks ago in late May when I brought up the 4 international players that I was told about. 2 names I couldn't mention. One I wasn't given. Mika Miernin I was, and eventually Ryzhov ended up being one of those. So Miernin and Ryzhov were legit. The other name I've never seen really attached with Arkansas. I still can't give it out because the sources asked me, just don't do it. And then the other one he hasn't shared with me. But having said that, I didn't know about Jovic, and I certainly didn't know about Paulo Semedo, who Arkansas announced yesterday. Now, we did a live reaction on that one, on Samito. And I talked about the fact that, look, I don't know enough about this. I'm behind on this. I wasn't out in front of it. But I was very skeptical. If you watch that segment or want to go back and watch it, about this meaning a certainty that he's going to be that 9th guy plugging in as your backup to Brazil. I said, that's a possibility. I even threw out there maybe some combination of him and Seeley based on what you need game to game or situation to situation, that maybe that next man up at number 9, not necessarily a regular in the rotation, but playable help as needed, but not a regular rotation piece. And so I was very skeptical about that. I said, I need to learn more. And part of that was wanting to talk more and get with the staff and find out more about this. That was a big part of that. But having said that, and now that I've had this talk, had this visit with a staff member, I'm more and more convinced that my inclination yesterday was, don't cement this as this is Trevor Brazil's backup. In the same vein that I say an Elmir Jovic is kind of really the 4th big man, and not, he's calling the 3rd center because that's his position, and Brazil's a 4 mostly, but also plays the 5. But because Brazil can play the 5 and he's got all the experience and we know what he brings to the table, really the other guys, unless Arkansas wants to go to the 4th guy or needs to, he's that's just what it is. In a similar vein now, I'm still convinced, obviously no one was going to supplant in any scenario, not even Ryzhov, Trevin Brazil at your 4 and getting the bulk of those minutes. But even when he's out of the game getting a blow or helping at the 5 spot, yeah, it feels like a good day to be a Hog fan. Another thank you, everybody. But even when Brazil's not at the 4, if he's on the bench in foul trouble or just getting a breather, he's helping at the 5. If this addition now of Paulo Semedo, I think you would see other players that we've been talking about through the 8 deep. A guy like Carter Knox being 2 wings on the floor with 2 guards and another big. There may be some minutes where we see both Nick Pringle and Malik Ewan on the court, but I think we would see those combinations before we would see Paulo Semedo in there. Now, that's not to say that guys like him and Javich and even Sealy, who, if I was ranking all of these guys outside the top 8 right now, not knowing for sure what they're going to do to add maybe one more to fill out the roster to 15, because remember, when they added Amir Brown, who's a walk-on, buddies with Malik Thomas out of Pittsburgh, he was the 12th edition. Then Javich 2 days ago, 13th. Yesterday, Samito, 14th. One more you can still fill. I think Arkansas is going to fill it. There's more than one way to get there, but Egor Ryzhov is not off the table, and I'm going to get to that part of the intel here in a second. But I've said all of that to say I don't think either one of these players push their way in to that 9th spot necessarily. And I think if anybody talent-wise and in this mix and maybe the most ready to help, and I still don't envision a projected, predictable, consistent, regular role for him, is Isaiah Sealy. I would put him at the top of a pecking order, including the last 2 names that have been added in the last 2 days, and then Kareem Artal. I put that group of 4 in a special category that's above what Arkansas had last year with the back end 6. Let's go through those names real quick. Jaden Carroll-Letwa, Aiden Kelly, Kareem Watkins, Melo Sanchez, Lawson Blake, and Cash Chavis was the last addition. And you guys know they didn't really play. I'll tell you how much they played. Carroll-Letwa played the most out of any of those guys. He appeared in 4 games. Chavis played the fewest of the games. He was the guy with the highest rating, a top 153 star who was committed and signed with a high major and had other high major offers and opportunities end up at Arkansas. He played in only 1 game. Ironically, his 6 minutes in that 1 game was more minutes than the other guys that played multiple games, including Carroll-Letwa. In 4 games, he played a total of 5 minutes. So that little snapshot of what that looked like tells you all you need to know about that group. So this group of 4, Sealy, Samito, Javich, and Artal, to me, are not quite like that, but they're not also projecting for me based on, and I know I'm still new on this new guy, but I've gathered enough intel. I'm going to go through some of it. I mean, one of my basketball buddies saw him play in person just a few weeks ago. So I'm going to give some of that information and some other stuff I've gathered. But here we are with a 15th spot still there, and I still think in Egor Ryzhov there could be a pathway. There are definitely complications there. It's an issue, but this staff member, when I asked, here's part of this intel that leaves the door open. Is this it? Was Paulo Semedo, was that it then? You said you were focused on 3. We got 2 commitment announcements. And is that it now? Because, this other thing didn't get announced. No, if it's the right situation, same thing I've heard. If it makes sense, it's the right fit. Good morning from Nevada. Thanks for all you do. Well, thank you, Nevada. You're up awfully early. Wow. Okay. Appreciate you. So same talking point. It would just be easy to say, yeah, that's it. I mean, they don't want to mess with, stirring up the idea that they're still working on something if they're not. I mean, that was candid. So they're not done. They're not finished. They had 15 last year. Again, there's more than one way and there's more than one time frame to get to 15 this year. And we're going to talk a little more about that. Almost 20 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. So the staff member says, if it makes sense, if it's the right fit, that all the same kind of stuff. And then I said, okay, so you just told me Egor Ryzhov was one of these three. Does that include him? Maybe. So if you know that this could be really difficult and you know that it may not work out, you're not going to have a public commitment announcement. A lot of smoke, a lot of sources, several. I got to 4 that said, look, this is headed to Arkansas. And then you started hearing, oh, but wait, there's this stuff, and this could really take a while. I mean, a maybe to me means we'll see what happens. So for those that were thinking, well, this Samito guy must be their answer for the problems going on with this, just hearing that from the staff and not being told, no, that's just not going to happen now. I wasn't told that. I threw out some other names that have been talked about before and recently. And even on one that seemed like something that was not very likely, the answer on that was something to the effect of crazier things have happened. Not that that was an indication that it's going to go to that, but the point is, these answers left it to, they're probably going to fill it out and get to 15. I don't think they're done yet. Could it be another back end piece in the vein of a Jaden Caroletwa and an Amir Brown? Sure. I think they're going to get to 15. If it makes sense and something they can get worked out, could it be an Egor Ryzhov? Why not? They don't have to rush on this. They're not trying to grab a body just to have one because they need it for a 9th depth piece like they had 9 last year. Calipari has said sometimes less is more. We actually started doing better, when we shrunk down on the rotation a little bit. It's not ideal, but I even have said multiple times and reminded everybody when they were full strength at 9 deep, they had one quality win together. That was Michigan. Not that it's ideal, but they recruit so well for their top rotation. That next man up is not a hope and a prayer and a wing and a prayer. They're all really good. Billy Richmond started out as your 9th man last year. And look at the impact he had at the end of the year. By the end of the year, even when they got everybody back for that last NCAA tournament game, Big Z was kind of your, effectively by then was kind of the last man in the pecking order. Whether you had Boogie Fland and or Adu Thero back when you got them late, it was even true before you got those guys back. He was kind of the guy fading at the end, but they were so good throughout that they made it work. And so they don't have to add anybody. So it could be that if they don't add anybody soon, it's because maybe they're waiting to see what happens with a Ryzhov that takes time. And they can afford to keep a spot open because they're not desperate to add someone in there. Or they could say, yeah, we still want to shore that up and we don't want to wait. And maybe it's one of the other names that have been bandied about. I talked about 2 more yesterday, Demir and Diop. Demir being the one that made more sense because the other guy, supposedly academically, it looks like a long shot. Demir's got a lot of high majors chasing him. There's other possibilities out there. Mika Murinin, if he reclasses, doesn't seem as likely to me for a couple of reasons. One is the staff said Ryzhov was one of the 3, and I believe that Ryzhov would be playable, consistent, regular depth to get you to a 9 deep, not with the same kind of role in combination that Thero and Brazil brought to the table, and now would be Ryzhov and Brazil, but still a consistent kind of role where I don't see that. I can't project that for these other guys who's we've named who are on the roster. So Mika, based on the idea of here's a 5-star, you're going to have to pay higher NIL, and that's going to correlate to the kind of role you're offering. And Arkansas is not offering a role that would help fast track a guy to being a one and done and going in the draft and then pay the kind of money that they're going to need in that 1 year if they come to you that corresponds with a bigger role than Arkansas is probably going to offer. It's not that they wouldn't pursue him and try and maybe continue to recruit him if he stays 26 as well. And what did I always say? If you got him to reclass, maybe the way to make that work is convince him to be a backup for a year and then maybe make it a 2-year plan and he's the guy the next year and you pay him plenty of NIL. But that's probably the only way you would lay down a lick of NIL for something like that. And Murinin's probably looking for the place that's going to give him the most playing time, the most NIL, and fast track him to a 1 year one and done. So that and the fact that Arkansas again was focused on these three, with Ryzhov being the one out of that group that I see as actual depth help immediately, means that Murnin wasn't a focal point here down this stretch. It doesn't mean that he couldn't come back into focus. It doesn't mean, again, that Ryzhov can't end up being the solution here. You could even have a situation I heard with Murnin, and we haven't talked about it because I got this from a source about the time when we started really focusing on Ryzhov the last week. And so we haven't talked as much about Murnin. But I had one source that told me that Murnin might have to be a midterm, at the end of the first semester reclass, to have enough academically so he can do that. So that might take a while, So if that's one example of something like that, keeping the last spot open for, there might be other ones where Calipari says, okay, we don't have to add this final spot now. We can wait it out, see what happens with a guy like Ryzhov. This is my speculation, hypothetical, and maybe any other reclass guys that do it at midterm or a transfer. You see all kinds of weird stuff, and players added at midterm. It's harder to do now. There's less of that, but it could still be a possibility, I suppose. So there's more than one way to deal with this last roster spot. But when a staff member says, hey, you give them a chance to tell you, yeah, we're done now, and they don't take that opportunity to acknowledge that, and they go, it's the same talking points, got to make sense, right fit, that kind of thing. That means they may not be finished. And again, they had a full roster last year. So I know, just kind of repeating some of that stuff. But that's good intel because it's coming from the staff. And I think, again, whether it's Ryzhov, some other guy that could plug in as a planned rotation depth piece at the 4, or another back end piece, I think the message here is Arkansas is not finished at getting to 15. And then it's the timing thing. Do they go ahead and do it now and get someone in for June and July, or later in the summer and they're just ready to start the season? Or do they have something set falling into place and just go ahead and just hold it open longer to add someone later? You remember, Big Z was added late, and then he wasn't even cleared until midway point of the season. Not that you want to go that route necessarily, but you're not in desperation mode. So it all depends on the viewpoint, and that could change day to day also when you're not in desperation point. You don't feel forced to do anything. You can allow things to come into the picture and change your perspective on it. All right, so I'll wrap that up. Good 20, almost 28 minutes in. That's the intel on the roster part of it. Don't put the Egor Ryzhov chapter to bed just yet. And it may be that it just never works out and nothing public will ever happen if that does. And it's just what we've talked about and what I've conveyed to you today. All right, let's talk about Arkansas's entire coaching staff. We've talked about this on location. Oh, by the way, the other thing on Paulo Semedo, I said I was going to do this, and I talked so much about the other stuff. He did visit Arkansas this past week as a lead up to this commitment. I did not mention that yesterday. I also did not mention his offers, reported offers. Arizona State, Florida State, and Miami. But something very interesting, there was talk about him being a reclass, and usually that means reclass and up or down. You're up, you're 26, and you're reclassing to 25. You want to go to college sooner and get your basketball journey to the pros moving along, fast track it. This was different. I've seen this a lot covering grassroots basketball over the years. He was an unsigned senior playing on the Puma Next Pro 16 circuit, and he played on Team Scoot 17U on that circuit with 5-star Alex Constanza, who I've covered in person multiple times in Pine Bluff, a 5-star top 25 rated class of 2026, 6'8" combo forward that Arkansas staff has recruited. We've talked about him, but he was on that team, and what he was doing was, he's 19 years old, and what you can do is you can say, well, I'm unsigned and I'm going to reclass. And a lot of times, based on the age, guys will then go to prep school, but based on the cutoff with their age date, whatever the date of their age is, they can still play an extra spring and summer. And so that's what he was endeavoring doing. And there's a cutoff on that at some point But that's what he was doing in May. And a buddy of mine was courtside in mid-May, so not even a month ago, about 4 weeks ago, and saw he and Constanza play against AEO Flight 17U, an in-state uh, team that just blew the doors off this, team that has all these high-rated guys, including a five-star and Paulo Semedo. And my buddy said, "Yeah, you look at the guy." He goes, in the pregame warm-ups, he's knocking down threes, he's getting to the rim, he's impressive. And when the game started, the AEL Flight just blew the doors off this team. Got a bunch of steals. I think DJ Hudson, if you probably heard about this game already. If you haven't, out of Springdale, teammates last year with Sealy at Springdale, 6A state runner-up, lost to Bryant in the title game. But he had like 8 or 9 dunks in that game. A lot of that in transition off steals. But my buddy says Samito didn't really get the ball a lot. He remembered him getting one dunk was impressive and didn't see a whole lot there. Well, coming into that weekend, and that was just one game that weekend that he saw. Coming into that weekend, Samito was averaging a double-double in some of those Puma 17U events as one of the older guys, obviously, because he's an unsigned senior. So your last year guys, and typically in each circuit, are in between their junior and senior seasons. And so he's got that extra year on him. And so that's just a little background there. So he was looking at reclassing. And what I've noticed is on those circuits, when you see players do that, those unsigned seniors, typically it's a couple of things when they go that route. They don't have committable offers yet, or they have one from a level they think they're better than, and they don't want to take that level. They want to get more exposure and maybe get a better level of offer. So like a D2 thinking he's a mid to low D1 will do that. And sometimes it pays off getting that kind of an offer, and get, being in front of coaches, being out on the circuits because the high school season's over allows you to maybe help yourself there. A lot of times it's because of academics and they can't get into school yet, and they just want to, they're going to have to do the prep thing, or maybe go JUCO. Maybe they're still trying to figure out how they can get that resolved, and they go ahead and play. So there's more than one reason to do that. But having said that, that's kind of some clarification if you were wondering about the fact that he's the 50th ranked player in the 2025 class. Well, he's been class of 2025, and it was like, again, a brief period of time, I guess, where he was considering reclassing up to 26. All right, now I am ready to talk about J.J. Andrews. And Naismith, future Naismith Hall of Fame coach, let's just say who it is, Dan Hurley of UConn, was raving about J.J. Andrews. I mean, he wasn't the only one. One of the two blue blood programs in the ACC, their coaching staff kind of going wild about him. A lot of buzz over J.J. Andrews from some high-profile folks. And look, it's their job to go out and evaluate. I mentioned the other day, it's probably easier to evaluate some things because there's fewer players at these all-star or all-American camps than there are in traveling around the country to the various shoe circuits in a weekend, going from Adidas in this city to Nike here to Under Armour here to Puma Next Pro 16 here. And you're trying to evaluate, and you got a lot of players that aren't on some of those teams that aren't necessarily better than mid-major or not even maybe D2 on some of those teams. And so there's just a lot of stuff to sort through. It's more concentrated here, and you can have all your entire staff instead of spreading out everybody all together in one location. And so we've talked about that the other day. So everybody's kind of has a better focus on certain players, especially the ones they're recruiting. Now, J.J. Andrews is spoken for. He's committed to Arkansas. That's sewn up. I mean, he's got to sign in November. That's going to happen. But it's the idea that all these, high major coaches are really, not only are they seeing a smaller group, but it's the best of the best, and the best of the best that stand out, it's even more pronounced. And so J.J. Andrews is going to be on a lot of scouting reports in the future when he gets, even as a freshman, as an Arkansas Razorback. The guy has just blown up. We went over some of the numbers the other day, and I'm going to go through them again. 32 points in a game in front of Arkansas's coaching staff, and he was 12 of 20 shooting from the field in that game, 2 of 3 from 3, had 6 rebounds, a couple assists, a couple of steals in that outing. Also in front of Calipari and the coaching staff, he had an 18-point game with 5 rebounds. That was on Friday. That was the last day that Thursday and Friday were the only 2 days for live eval. And then there was that was Wednesday and Thursday, the 2 days for live eval. And then Friday morning yesterday, they actually had another 5-on-5 game over at top MBPA Top 100. Coaches were gone, but JJ with a nice 22-point game, 10 of 14 from the field. Yowza. I think 2 of 3 at the foul line, a couple of rebounds and assists and a steal. But I mean, he's consistently, whether it's Nike EYBL, this setting, consistently averaging around 20 points per game, shooting very efficiently at all 3 levels, at all 3 splits. When you talk about overall field goals, certainly the 2-point field goal part of that, 3-point shooting and free throws. So he's getting the job done. And I can tell you that this staff is absolutely ecstatic about what they have here. And there's it's kind of one of these things that I get the sense that they're kind of like pounding their chest. Like, yeah, we know what we got, and we knew what we were getting, and we knew why it was important to get this done. I mean, you can't even tell this staff, great job identifying in-state guys that can help you and going out there and working on it. You gotta close it up and say, and closing the deal, and you close the deal. I think that's what's important. Remember, I always said making offers to in-state guys, that can't be window dressing. Calipari said we're going to go after the ones in state who we think can help us, but to prove that you mean that, you got to close the deal and show it by bringing them onto your roster. Isaiah Seeley's first in that, and JJ Andrews is the next. But look, this guy's a 5-star. There's something criminal or negligent or malpractice if at the end of the day, all of the services don't have him there. That we riot. We take to the streets and riot. And as my old friend Winston Wolfe, well, I guess that's Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction, said, as good as he's been, let's not start blanking each other's blankety blanks just yet. And that's what I mean when I look at some of these recruiting services. I was shocked when they never delivered Moses Moody in the final rankings as a 5-star. He should have been. So I say I don't see how they all won't, but that stuff happens sometimes. There's one service in particular that seems to not be real high on the Arkansas signees, and so their rankings and some of the star values they give reflect some of that. All right, we're nearly 38 minutes in. Okay, that's a good comment. Joe Griffin, glad that Kenny Payne's got a deep front court so he can do what he does best. So if these guys are developmental pieces more so than ready to play right away, which is what I think when we talk about the 7'1" Paulo Semedo, 7'1", 225, 7'5", someone told me even a 7'8", he thinks it's a 7'8" wingspan. And then the big body, 6'11's what I've seen him listed as. I've seen others say 7 foot, but 265 in Elmir Zjavich. Kenny Payne, I mean, who better to help work with these guys, help develop them, and maybe help them become real helpers in the rotation at some point down the line. Who knows? I mean, but that's the guy that can do it. And Arkansas's, and to say that these back end guys won't help, I'm only talking about regular rotation. I'm not talking about. They're obviously going to help you get through practices, have enough bodies. They're that's just part of it too. That's just part of it, because if you do get in some kind of weird pinch, these guys, you're better equipped to have an emergency plug-in than you were a year ago. And so there may be value there even. And we've acknowledged that. So to say that they're, that they don't matter, I won't go there. And that's not the point. That's really about it. I mean, we've kind of hit it all. I will say that last game where JJ had 22 points, The priority big man, 7'1" out of class 2026, 7'1", 285, Arafan Diane, on JJ's team. In that same game, he had 17 points. He was 6 of 8 from the field, including 1 of 1 from 3 and 4 of 4 from the foul line. Now, he had a 25-point game earlier in those 5-on-5 at top 100. And in that 25-point game, he was 8 of 12 from the field and 9 of 10 at the foul line. You look at those two games, 13 of 14 at the foul line. And we're talking about a 7'1", 285. And the rough comparison I made, and I said he was a poor man's Joel Embiid, and his guardian / one of his agent or one of his representatives told me he saw some of the skill set stuff of a poor man's Joker, or early stage Joker. We can laugh about that, but anytime a guy that size is putting up those kind of numbers, and they're not all dunks. I mean, he's got craft. He'll knock down some threes. I mentioned that before. He passes the ball, but just to think about that shooting touch. I mean, 13 of 14 at the foul line. You don't see a lot of big men that size that are that efficient even shooting there. Another game, I think the game where JJ had 18 and 5 was the game that Arafan chipped in 8 points and 7 rebounds. So there's some of his stats through the event. I was trying to see if there were any, I didn't get too many comments. We're about 41 minutes in. We can wrap this up. But I want to thank everybody again for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Let's go back to the nutshells again. The trio of names that Arkansas was focused on the last couple of weeks: Egor Ryzhov, Elmir Javic, and Paulo Semedo. The latter of those two have been added to the roster. The other one's a wait and see, not only for Arkansas, I guess for anybody if Arkansas or Ryzhov peel away from the other permanently for good. Based on things that were worded to me by the staff, the door's at least still cracked there for him and maybe others, and there's more than one way to do it, and there's more than one time frame to do it. We walked through all of that. That's the second part of it. And then the third part, again, is a lot of buzz over J.J. Andrews. And when you look at some of the best college programs in the country, kind of envious was the way it sounded to me, and how they just went on and on about the special talent that he showcased at MBPA Top 100 Camp. And the headliner there is Naismith Hall of Fame, future Naismith Hall of Famer Danny Hurley of the Yukon Huskies. Back-to-back national titles, and they were on their way to a three-peat until Florida, in a tight game in the NCAA tournament last year, prevailed in the end and ended up going on to win the national title. So we know Hurley's destined for the Hall of Fame just based on those two titles. So thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. It's Kevin McPherson. We made it to 43 minutes. This is my longest episode in a while. If something breaks again today, which I don't expect, I'll come back on. But we've got Diamond Hogs in about 12 hours from now. I'm glad I got this over early. Thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves. We appreciate all of you. See you soon.